All right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. So glad to talk to you today, and I will be talking quite a bit about Israel, Gaza, the situation there, how just awful it is, how terrible it is. Do want to make a quick comment though, since I lead the program off with that Für Elise. It's a Beethoven piano piece, and I think it's in the public domain. It certainly was written long before copyright law would now control, but on the other hand, it is a performance. So I don't know whether I hope it's public domain, but I bring up, if it isn't and you have some rights to it, please let me know and I'll stop using it, or we can talk about that. I bring it up because I got a notification. The stuff I talk about is so depressing, right? So unhappy. You don't want to, you can only take it in so many doses before you just can't take it. But this is the world we live in right now. Things are that bad. In fact, I had a conversation yesterday with somebody, with a person, and we were talking about graduation and how boys who go to all boys schools may be doing better than those in co-ed schools. And I said, I always thought it was more that girls do better in all girls schools because they don't have to compete with boys. Boys, especially when they reach adolescence, can tend to be more dominating and try to be in control, and it makes it harder for some girls who sort of step back rather than stepping forward. And the response was, well, but times are really bad for boys. Boys are not doing well. Maybe the co-ed environment in some ways is not helping boys. And I rejoined with, it is not an easy time to be a human being. It's not just for boys. It's not just for girls. We're living in a very, very tough time for human beings. And that's what we have to address, I believe, more so even than singling out or identifying discrete groups of people and saying, well, girls or people of color or white people or whatever group you want to select, Jewish people, and say it's really hard for them. It's hard to be a human. Of course, there are groups, discrete groups of people, generally identifiable by geography, sometimes by ethnicity or religion, who are being targeted. And for them, life is just awful. They're subject to atrocities. And of course, I'm speaking right now, focusing in on the people of Gaza, because they are being targeted by the Israeli military, and the people in Palestine, the Palestinian people, have been targeted by Israel for now generations. And this has to end. This has to stop. We must do everything in our power to stop it. Of course, we're doing the opposite. The United States is actually aiding and abetting this genocide, and you can see right there. This is brand new from UNRWA, United Nations. What is it? I always get it wrong. I don't know. UNRWA, UNRWA. 8,000 children diagnosed with malnutrition amid ongoing shelling, and this is right now in Gaza. It could hardly be worse. Just a little more information there about just how bad things are. Is it United Nations Relief Works Agency, maybe? Relief something agency? Maybe. UNRWA. That stuff always gets in my craw, like I can't remember abbreviation, and I just, what is it? What is it? Here you see from today's date, June 13, 2024, from the United Nations. So this is not from not from Hamas. I would say Al Jazeera, because Al Jazeera relies a lot on the Palestinian Aid Ministry of Health. Heavy shelling reported in a so-called safe zone. So again, Israel not respecting in any way civilian lives. So despite the push now for a ceasefire, Israel continues to shell. 32 deaths in Gaza from malnutrition. So you do see there is absolutely famine. Israel using famine as a weapon, and they are keeping out, right? They are actively stymieing relief trucks, supplies from coming in to Gaza. It's genocide. It's that simple. There is a mention there, a possible ceasefire negotiations. Anthony Blinken leading those. for the United States. And there have been a number of reports that I've relayed to you how Hamas has agreed to certain terms. Hamas has agreed to proposals by Qatar, by Egypt for ceasefire, by the UN. But the United States getting involved has basically acted as a stenographer for Israel. And the ceasefire proposal that the United States, which it tells us Israel has agreed to, although it's not absolutely clear Israel has. But the United States says, oh, Israel's agreed. It's just Hamas that's standing in the way. Well, to the extent that's true, it's because the proposal is the one that Israel wanted, which is no more Hamas. Hamas is gone. And they're saying to Hamas, you want us to stop killing your people, then you dissolve. You're gone. You're done. And some might say, I would not be one of them, but some might say, well, that's a reasonable request given that Hamas was behind October 7, where somewhere around 1,100 and 1,150 Israelis were murdered. So, you would say, well, so Hamas should go then. A couple of answers. One, no one's talking about the Netanyahu government dissolving. No one's saying we have to come up with a totally different Israeli leadership, given that they're guilty of war crimes, guilty of genocide, guilty of ethnic cleansing. If Hamas has to leave power, has to cede all power, then why doesn't the current Israeli government, why isn't the Knesset going to be dissolved? That's one question I would have. But the other question that I would have is for Israel. If you're going to dissolve Hamas, you're going to say we're going to get rid of Hamas, no more Hamas, what's your plan for Gaza? Who will be the authorities? You went in rampaging through Gaza and also the West Bank, killing, maiming, committing sexual crimes against Palestinians. You've done all of this, and yet you had no plan for authorities to take control of the government, to take control of the country, to be in charge civilly, to have civil control over the areas that you've overrun. And the result, famine. The result, a void where Hamas has returned to areas where the Israeli military isn't active. So if your plan is to dissolve Hamas, you've demonstrated you have no alternative for civilian control. It would be a complete, anarchy. Completely unworkable plan. The plan is unworkable, not the demands by Hamas, which is that this be permanent. They're saying, stop it. We want you to stop killing us. We want you to stop using famine as a weapon. And Israel's saying, oh, no. We may have a ceasefire, but we're going to use that ceasefire to try to get you all behind bars, every single Hamas militant, and to solidify our control over that region. They have certainly not agreed, which Hamas has said, you got to get out. Nope, we're not getting out. And although I don't believe in a two-state solution, I believe in a one-state solution, Israel hasn't even gone as far as a one-state where every single resident in that area has equal political rights and economic guarantees, economic security, which, by the way, is not in the least bit unworkable. It's not in the least bit unreasonable. It's perfectly doable if there was political will, if the Israeli government was up to doing it, but they're not. It would be tough, right? I mean, look, in the wake of the Civil War in the United States, the defeated Southerners were simply unwilling to treat their African-American former enslaved people like human beings. They were insistent on them being subordinate, insisting on them being second, continue to work at very, very low pay. Maybe they pay them a little bit, but the pay would be virtually nil. and they would have to be subservient. You know, the white South was not prepared for freedom, for liberation. And in the end, the North said, we're done. We're not going to keep forcing justice in the South. We're walking away. Well, the UN can't do that. The United States can't do that. We have to say to Israel, no. The Palestinians are human beings. They have every right to be in that area just as much as you do. We're not going to kick them out. We're not going to take their land from them. We're not going to let you push them into the desert. We're going to insist that they be given equal rights. And we're going to stay, and we're going to do that as long as it takes. Sounds daunting, right? But it's got to be better than what we're seeing right now, 37,000 plus killed, murdered by Israel. It's awful. If you want to join me, love to talk to you. 240-242-5646. 240-242-5646. Do not forget, please do subscribe. Click the like, click the subscribe button. Look, with Brianna Joy Gray off at the Hill rising, there's definitely room for a pro-peace, pro-Palestine voice. That would be mine. And what's different about what I do is I talk to you. I listen to you. I hear from you. The U.S., again, I mentioned this, Blinken is in these talks right now trying to, I guess, force or cajole Hamas into accepting terms that, accepting Israel's take it or leave it proposal. Either you take what we tell you, which is you get out, you're done, Hamas is done, we're going to stay, we're not going anywhere, Hamas is out of here, and otherwise we're going to keep the killing. And we're not going to agree to any permanent ceasefire either. This is all in the wake of a UN report that just came out that really does paint what I believe to be a very, very clear picture of Israel as the much more morally culpable party. I mean, I don't think you need a report because they're the oppressor state. In the end, they're the oppressor state. In the end, they're the country which has a military, which is denying freedom to millions of people based on their ethnicity, based on their religion. It's really not ethnicity, it's their religion. I mean, the Palestinians, I guess they could convert to become Jews. They would be accepted. They would be welcome. And I believe, I don't know, maybe they wouldn't. I think that's the way it is, though. Although my understanding is that, for example, Ethiopian Jews have tended to be treated as second-class citizens in Israel. There's been some dispute about that. Haaretz published a report that there had been experimentation done on Ethiopian Jews without their consent by Israeli doctors. Apparently that study was debunked, or at least serious questions were called as to its legitimacy was called into question. I don't really know. I understand there are certainly black Israelis who are supporting the government, right? I mean, they don't all hate the government. They're not all against it. I don't think there are very many Palestinian or Arabic Israelis who support the government of Israel. The black Israelis are generally Jewish, for whatever that's worth. Before we get to Blinken, I just wanted to go through a little bit of my thought process for today's program. I'm going to show, I don't always do this, but the thumbnail I put together for the live stream for today was, there's no moral equivalency, and you can see it right there. Let me take I don't have two ovals on the screen. So there you can see it, and I think it's clear. Maybe it's not as good as it should have been, this image, and it's part of what I spend my time doing, is putting together these thumbnails and graphics and the like. So there's an Israeli flag and there's a Palestinian flag, and it's ambiguous, right? There's no moral equivalency. Well, maybe who am I saying isn't equivalent to the other? Israel's always saying there's no moral equivalency. We're decent, we're civilized, we're human beings, we're modern, and Palestine is the opposite. Something Bill Maher often talks about, right, is how, they're basically medieval people in Palestine. And, the truth is the opposite in terms of the behavior to the other. As bad as the Palestinians' actions were on October 7, Israel has acted far more atrociously and without any justification whatsoever, just pure revenge. But I put together that graphic, and that's the one I used. But I want to show the one that I considered, and I decided not to use it. There's one with the Israeli flag with the Star of David and the little, stop sign or no sign, which makes it very clear, right, that Israel is the less moral, is more morally culpable. By the way, I'm sorry if you hear the lawnmower in the background. It's kind of bad. The reason I didn't go with that is we've had some conversation on this program about anti-Semitism. And I felt like, well, I don't think that's anti-Semitic but the Star of David clearly is a symbol of Jews, right, of Jewish people. So if you use the Star of David and you kind of mock it or treat it disrespectfully, I think there's an argument it's often anti-Semitic. Now, the problem, of course, is that Israel has adopted the Star of David for its flag. So it is a symbol not just of Jewish people, but of the state of Israel, the genocidal state of Israel. So you run into the challenge, can I disrespect the symbol? If it does represent Jews, but it also represents Israel, where is that line? Because at some point, I guess there's a line. A lot of times Israeli supporters, Zionists, will say, oh, you can't say that about Israel. That's anti-Semitic. You can't say that there's some nefarious plot where Israelis are controlling the media, because that sounds too much like the trope that Jews control the media or they control the banks. So you can't say this and you can't say that. Well, I think it's a load of crap. Look, we're right now, Rachel Maddow is going on and on about how Russia is engaged in a conspiracy to undermine our election in 2024. And what the evidence really shows is that Israel is actually engaged in all manner of various social media, actions, activities, right? Surreptitiously planning memes throughout Facebook and X and the like, and Instagram, and doing everything possible to influence the election and support Trump. So we are actually seeing Israel do that. So I don't really have you can say Israel does this or Israel does that without running afoul, in my view, of running into legitimate claims of anti-Semitism. And as I said yesterday, I'm not a big believer. I'm opposed to constantly looking for and trying to ferret out bigots and haters and all that. My view is you respond to arguments. If people make a particular argument, you respond to it. You don't attack the person making the argument unless the person making the argument has a specific individual financial stake. So if Chevron tells me, oh no, you don't have to worry about the climate cataclysm, it's not true, it's not happening, then I'm going to say, wait a second, you're benefiting from our continuing to consume fossil fuels. So you have a vested interest in getting me to believe it's not real, that the climate crisis is a hoax. So that's very, very relevant, right? If an Israeli spokesperson says, oh, we didn't commit any atrocities, I'm not going to just say, oh, wait, yes, you did. Here's the pictures, although I would do that. But I think it also would call them, their actual credibility into question. We should look at the source. But when you're having a discussion with people, when you're talking about protesters on a college campus, I don't think you should be constant. People who are in your progressive group. No, don't be trying to dope them out as bigots or haters or whatever you want to call them, misogynists. No, engage with them in good faith. Now, at some point, you may say, hey, every time I try to talk to them, they don't listen. They're not willing to hear what I have to say. You might throw up your hands. I get all that. But without hard evidence of bias, I think that's not where you should go. I think you should meet people halfway. And that's kind of what the New York Times is trying to do now. So in response to this UN report, they're kind of, but you try to meet people both, halfway, hear what they have to say. That doesn't mean you agree. That doesn't mean you accept their position. It may be completely wrong. So the UN report accuses both Israel and Palestinian groups of war crimes. It's true, but in a way, it's a little misleading, because if you delve into what the New York Times tells you, it's clear, at least it's certainly clear to me, that Israel is far more of a malefactor. Yes, on October 7, crimes were committed. Murders were committed. It was really bad. Hamas murdered people. Yes. This is what happens when a group of people are oppressed, when they're persecuted, when they're treated like crap, when they're kicked in the teeth over and over and over. They will respond. They will retaliate. And lots of times the people that they respond against are innocent. And it's wrong-headed, it's misguided, it's sad, it's tragic. The way you avoid that happening, or the best way you can try to avoid that happening in the future, is don't mistreat, don't abuse people, and hold your government, if you possibly can, to a higher standard. Doesn't mean it's always going to work. Doesn't mean you always will be able to. Our government does terrible things. We were attacked on 9/11. I think that attack was in many ways unfair, unjustified. The United States didn't deserve it. But as Barack Obama's former reverend, I forget his name, said, the chickens have come home to roost. We did awful things around the world. We're probably the greatest purveyor of violence around the world of anybody. So we shouldn't be so surprised. We shouldn't be so outraged when we ourselves are targeted. We don't want to be targeted in the future, and also not just out of self-interest, but because it's morally imperative. We should be treating people decently. Here's the report. Let me go through a few. This just came out, just dropped by the UN. It's like, remember there was a report on sexual violence. It wasn't like, I don't know, they did it back in February, I think, and they said that they couldn't confirm rapes, but they did confirm that there was reason to believe there was sexual violence on October 7. So here's more from this report. This is what Hamas did, according to the UN. Many abductions were carried out with significant physical, mental, and sexual violence. And women and women's bodies were used as victory trophies by male perpetrators. So we saw that video. It's very upsetting, where a Hamas militant is, he has probably the dead body of a German Israeli woman who had been at the rave there in southern Israel. And it's very upsetting to look at. And it does look like her body's being used as a trophy. She's wearing a very, revealing dress, although it doesn't appear that the Hamas militant had, pulled it off her or ripped it or anything like that, but her body is clearly displayed. It is very, very upsetting. And I can totally get why people would be very, very bothered by that. It's wrong. There's no question about it. So this seems accurate, at least from what I can confirm. But if you keep going into it, you can see that many of the allegations, the claims by Israel and by the New York Times, could not be corroborated by the UN. So the UN Commission reviewed allegations by journalists and Israeli authorities that there was rape committed, but it could not independently verify them. It did not have evidence of that. Why not? No access to victims, witnesses, crime sites. And a lot of the argument there as well is because the crime happened a long time ago. But the investigation was actually thwarted by Israeli authorities. I don't know how you can read that and conclude that rape was used as a weapon by Hamas. I've heard people will say, well, this is what happens in war. It wasn't war, it was a crime. It was a crime where Hamas went in, committed some terrible atrocities, and then left. The place where women are much more likely and girls are much more likely to be victimized are when they're being held prisoner. And that would include the Hamas hostages. And some of them probably are. There have been reports by women released of sexual violence. I don't know if specifically rape, but of sexual violence for sure. And, probably happened. It's terrible. So, this is bad. What Hamas did is bad. I will say again, and I know like Norm Finkelstein has said he will not condemn Hamas because in context you have to understand what Hamas did is a response, a reaction to decades of Israeli persecution and oppression. I understand that. I can hold two thoughts. One, Israeli persecution and oppression is actually the driving force behind the violence, including what happened on October 7th. But still, people have to act with some degree of humanity, even against their oppressors. It's tough. You don't want to tell people who are the victims that they can't respond, that they can't defend themselves. And I think there was a large sense among the Palestinians and Hamas, they were defending themselves, right? I mean, they killed, or they tried to take hostage and killed a lot of police and army people. But it was a really bad thing that they did. Even recognizing the situation and the circumstances that may be mitigating factors. What about, though, what Israel has done? And the New York Times acknowledges Israel, too, deserves blame. And I would argue far more. First of all, their actions are what triggered, what catalyzed October 7. And for those who say, well, October 7 catalyzed the response by Israel, no. If Israel's goal was to prevent another October 7, they did just the opposite. Their actions belie that position. If Israel's goal was to free the hostages, their actions belie that. They could have freed the hostages long ago, simply by engaging in a ceasefire. And now Blinken says they won't engage in a ceasefire. We'll get into that. The Hamas doesn't want a ceasefire. It's not Israel, it's Hamas. We'll get to that in a little bit. What has happened? The conflict. I wouldn't say the conflict. No, Israel's violent orgy against Palestine has, in its violent orgy against Palestine, Israel has killed or maimed tens of thousands of Palestinian children, a scale and a rate of casualties that are unparalleled across conflicts in recent decades. And that's why I said Israel's actions are unparalleled. Nothing comes close. October 7, we've seen September, 9/11. Many more people were killed in 9/11 than on October 7, 3 times as many, I believe. Nothing is close right now in terms of the horror inflicted on human beings. Nothing is close in decades to what Israel's doing. And the UN, goes into specifics. So they give you some, clear-cut examples of the crimes. Extermination. It sounds like genocide, doesn't it? Murder. Gender persecution targeting Palestinian men and boys. Forcible transfer of the population, torture, and inhuman and cruel treatment. So that's what Israel's doing. And they're doing it over a period of months, now well over half a year. Hamas committed a crime on one day. There's simply no moral equivalency. What Israel's doing is much, much, much worse. The UN panel, and I wonder how the New York Times feels about reporting this, right? I mean, because the New York Times is certainly complicit in the in the spread of Israeli propaganda. They have been largely a mouthpiece for Israel and for the U.S. government, the administration's support of Israel. But there you can see real specifics from the Times. They're reporting what the UN panel had to say. They use sexual and gender-based violence, including forced nudity and sexual humiliation, as an operating procedure. So right there, that is worse than what Hamas did when it comes to sexual crimes. Because whatever Hamas did, and they said they displayed some men and women as trophies, and it's horrible. But when we're talking about the scale, right? We're talking about who needs to stop. Hamas did that on one day. It was terrible. They did in the aftermath. It was terrible. It's Israel that is weaponizing sex. It's Israel that's using sexual violence as an operating procedure. And they're targeting, it says here, it targets not women, not girls, but men and boys for humiliation. This reminds me of what happened at Abu Ghraib when the United States was torturing Iraqis, torturing people they claimed were Al-Qaeda. And not all were, remember? Not all were. Some had to be released. There was no evidence to support it. They held them for as long as they could. But a lot of times, like, men were forced to, they would urinate on a Quran in front of them and other ways to try to sexually humiliate Muslim men. The treatment was intentionally sexualized as retaliation for the attack. Remember, this is the government. This is the military that we're supplying, that we're supporting, that we're backing. I don't see how you can vote for Joe Biden. I don't know how you could vote for him knowing this. The Times of London did a pretty big expose, or a pretty big story, examining whether there's proof of any of the sexual crimes by Hamas. What do we know was kind of their question. And I actually did pay for a 6-month or 1-year subscription just to read this article, because I'd heard about this through Crystal Ball on Crystal and Saga, or Breaking Points. I thought, I guess it's worth it. I need to read this. I should know what it says. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing. And I felt like the article, kind of like the New York Times, pretty much tried to bend over backwards to find evidence to support allegations that Hamas had done horrible things, which they did. I mean, they murdered a lot of people. I'm going to show you just a little bit of it. I'm going to get to Blinken. I want to finish up today's program talking a little bit more about AOC, since I got some pushback from my good friend Shade on my report on AOC. And I want to respond to that. I was thinking about doing it on the free-for-all tomorrow, and I may also, but today I really wanted to get into it a little bit more. But I also want to talk to you. So please, if you can, please call 240-242-5646. I've been accused of not being that effective, right? That I'm not making a difference. I fear that's true. I don't think that's an unfair criticism of me. So let's get effective. Let's work together. Let's figure out a way so that we can actually really make a difference, because we're not, I hate to say it, I don't know that I am making a difference, right? I fear I'm exactly not. Why am I not also making a difference when it comes to seeing my slide deck? For some reason, that is not popping up on my screen either. Let me, there we go. So from the Times of London, the report confirmed. This is the report back in March. So they're relying on a UN report from March, but they also add their own analysis to it, which we'll get to. The report confirmed Israeli authorities were unable to provide much of the evidence that political leaders had insisted existed. So Israel's saying, oh, there's all this proof that Hamas engaged in sexual violence, that it was a weapon they were wielding against Israel, against Israeli women, against Israeli girls. But when they were questioned about that, they could find no depictions of rape anywhere. They couldn't find any in any images that Israel supplied. There were no eyewitnesses to rape that were found. Now, again, the argument could be, well, the argument is, well, they're all dead. But there were claims that there was evidence. And those claims cannot be substantiated at this point. The claims against Israel have been largely substantiated. But here's what the UN report continued back in March, but it's important. So that report, according to the Times of London, was confusing because they say, and they're right, I mean, the Times correctly notes, the report does say, yes, there were some of those sexual assault claims are substantiated, but there's no proof that was, or evidence that it was systematic. There may have been one or two incidents, maybe a handful, but you haven't shown any direct link. You haven't shown that Hamas commanders ordered it, or that this was something that was discussed in advance. There may have been a few examples, but that's it. And again, that's very different from what we already know about Israel, which is that they were engaged in a deliberate effort to humiliate sexually Palestinian boys and men. No evidence provided of alleged orders to rape. The UN said to Israel, well, what about, we're hearing from Palestinian women and girls that they're being molested by you. Could you please investigate? I mean, you've got all these women and girls in custody in Israel. Could you please investigate those for us? Nope. Nope. We're not going to do it. Trying to create some false equivalence, a false equivalency. We're not going to allow it. Well, okay. To me, that sure makes Israel look like liars, like dishonest, like phonies. And it wasn't just the investigation, by the way, that Israel refused to cooperate with, they didn't cooperate with the UN investigation, and they refused to agree to conduct their own investigation, which I'm sort of surprised they didn't just conduct one and whitewash everything. This is the last segment I'm going to show from that report from the UN, from the Times of London, because I think it's very pertinent to the next segment, which is going to be about Blinken and the ceasefire that he's working towards now, trying to get now. He says he's trying to broker right now. The other recommendation by the UN representative, Patton, was a ceasefire. She said, Patton's a woman, she said, hey, we all agree, I think we can all agree that sexual violence in war or anywhere else is awful, it's wrong, it's reprehensible, it's abhorrent. And I'm concerned about those hostages in Gaza, and I'm sure Israel is too. Let's have a ceasefire, because we know if there's a ceasefire, every time there's been a ceasefire, hostages are released. And by the way, for what it's worth, if Israel is committing sexual violence against Palestinian women, well, they can be released too. So we can kind of hopefully protect some women, right? Seems to make all the sense in the world. Israel refused point blank. So why would you refuse if you're Israel? This is from the Times of London. This is a conservative media outlet from the UK. Not some lefty, it's not Al Jazeera. It's from the Times of London. So why would you refuse? Why would you refuse a ceasefire? Because you want to keep killing Palestinians. Because you want to eradicate the Gaza. You want to take the land. That's why. That's why Israel's continuing this. That's why Israel's perpetrating it. Endlessly, mercilessly, brutally. So they can take the land. So Anthony Blinken is pushing Hamas, he says, for ceasefire. He says it's Hamas is the problem. Here he is at a press conference yesterday. So we'll see if we can get this for you. Let me see if I can put the video up for you. Here he is. He's at the podium with a, I believe, is it a Qatari? Yeah, that's pretty, you know, the Arab countries are really serious about trying to end this. We send this sort of feckless, you know, ineffective, which is what feckless means, goofball Blinken. Qatari's prime minister is at this. That's how seriously they take it. Their head of state is there to try to figure out a way to end the killing, and Israel's killing of Gazans. So at the press conference, let's see if I can. This is sort of having some problems with this imagery. I don't like that. Here we go. Let's play.
Thank you both. Secretary Blinken, for you, despite your intense efforts to pressure Hamas, they obviously don't seem to be accepting the deal as President Biden laid out, and the Israelis are characterizing this as a flat-out rejection. Does Hamas's response count as a rejection of the deal in your view? Do you think the deal is essentially dead? And if not, what exactly is the U.S. diplomatic strategy now to try and keep these talks alive and bring the parties closer together? And secondly, the U.S. has put all the emphasis on pressuring Hamas, at least publicly. But do you think it might be time for the U.S. to put more pressure on Israel to move them closer towards accepting the permanent ceasefire that Hamas has asked for, even if that allows the group to survive in some form?
All right, so it's a very reasonable question. Why aren't you putting any pressure on Israel? And obviously, there's zero pressure on Israel. Why would Israel agree to anything it doesn't want? 100%. It is Lord and master of Gaza. It does whatever it wants with complete impunity. The United States protects Israel in the United Nations, and the United States continues to supply Israel with all the weapons it wants to kill Gazans. So, of course, there's going to be no willingness of any kind on Israel to compromise. And the idea that it's Hamas that's stopping the ceasefire is laughable. We just saw from that Times of London report, even at the behest of the United Nations to save Israeli hostages' lives, Israel said, nope, no ceasefire.
And Prime Minister, even with the elaborate three-phase deal that's being created to try and bridge the divide between Israel and Hamas, we still seem to be stuck on the fundamental question of a temporary versus a permanent truce, which is effectively, will Israel allow Hamas to survive this? Do you think these negotiations can really be salvaged, and what is the risk to the region if these talks continue to fail? Thanks.
Thanks, Ian. Look, as I said, based on what we saw last night, the response from Hamas.
So I just want to, before we hear Blinken sort of hem and haw and put everything on Hamas, I don't want to spend too much time on it because it's just kind of annoying, it's upsetting, it's irritating. I would just make this point. Why is it up to Israel to determine whether Hamas survives in some form? Why does Israel get to decide that? If this is going to be a truce, if this is going to be negotiations, if the United States has some real power, some leverage, then why does Israel just simply say, no, unless Hamas is done, we're going to keep killing Palestinians mercilessly, which they'll do in any event. But I don't understand that. Now, the argument could be, well, Israel's a sovereign nation. They've got an army. They can do with it what they like. And that's true. But of course, we are a sovereign nation too that's supplying that army. And if we stop supplying that army, then guess what? They won't be able to do all that killing that they're, so happily going about at this time, so gleefully engaging in. So again, it's so strange. We're just letting, this is not news to anyone, I don't think, but Israel's completely driving this boat. And it's just awful. It's just wrong. All right, let's go back to Blinken just a little bit longer.
Changes proposed to the deal that was on the table and that the entire world has gotten behind, but some of those are workable changes. Some, as I said, are not. I don't want to characterize it further, but, at some point in a negotiation, and this has gone back and forth for a long time, you get to a point where if one side continues to change its demands, including making demands and insisting on changes for things that it already accepted, you have to question whether they're proceeding in good faith or not. But
all right, so he doesn't really give any specifics as to what allegedly Hamas did agree to or doesn't agree to or change its mind on. It's very, it's all just sort of generic boilerplate complaints by Blinken. But again, we do know that when Qatar, for those who are inclined to blame Hamas for the failed to date discussion, ceasefire not happening, we know that on several occasions, Hamas did say, we're going to accept the proposals by Qatar and Egypt, and they were rebuffed by Israel because Israel is saying, no, Hamas has to go. Hamas has to go. And if that's what they want to say, then there's not going to be a ceasefire. They're saying to Hamas, you have to negotiate yourself out of existence without any other plan, without any plan whatsoever for Gaza, because we sure as hell don't. All right, before we move on, I just want to play a little bit more because Blinken said something that was just so outrageous, I don't think I can let it go.
Based on what we've seen and what I've discussed with the Prime Minister and what we discussed with our Egyptian colleagues, we're determined to try to bridge the gaps. And I believe those gaps are bridgeable. Doesn't mean they will be bridged because, again, it ultimately depends on people saying yes. But here's the thing, and we both said it. The longer this goes on, and remember, Hamas had this for 12 days, and it's not as if the world stood still in those 12 days. People were suffering throughout those 12 days. The longer this goes on, the more people will suffer.
So what he's saying is Israel's going to keep killing Gazans. We're going to keep supporting Israel's violence, unchecked, remorseless in the West Bank, no matter what. We are going to be behind Israel. So either Hamas gives everything Israel wants to Israel, the oppressor state, the persecuting state, or Palestinians will continue to die. And by the way, they probably will continue to die anyway. All right, I got a caller. Good afternoon, caller. Who do I have?
Hey, Hal, it's Stephanie.
Hey, Stephanie. How you doing today? I'm sure this
I'm
news
okay.
it's so depressing. It's so sad what's happening.
It is depressing every day, and again, I want to thank you. It reminds me of our old days because, I agree with you. The inter-rater reliability, which is a statistical term, is so high between you and me.
I'm glad there's someone.
Anyway.
I knew there was someone out there who agreed with me because I fear I've alienated just about everyone else on the planet, Stephanie, who they won't even take my calls anymore. They're so angry with me for some mistake or another that I've made, some error of judgment.
I'm sorry to hear that, but just know that I'm fighting with my best friends and I are fighting, not not like end relationship types of fighting, but we can't discuss politics anymore kinds of fighting, because most of them are like, Clintonite, DNC, blue no matter who people. So anyway, what I did want to say, and it comes back to something I think I mentioned the last time I called, which is the fact that all of this is not in the long-term interest of the United States, and it's not even in the long-term interest of Israel. It's certainly not in the long-term interest of Jews worldwide. So I'm just kind of always perplexed, and I know, those sort of military-industrial complex people, they have lost all sense of proportionality and reality. But I do have to ask, what do you think, like, ever since the whole Ghislaine Maxwell stuff broke and the Jeffrey Epstein stuff broke, I've been wondering, is Blinken really kind of like a Mossad operative inside the United States government? What do you think?
I think that the people who get into positions of power in this country have to be consistently, they have to consistently demonstrate a certain ideology that's congenial to the military-industrial complex, which includes Israel. Does that answer the question? Yeah. I just think you don't get to be Secretary of State unless you're a person like Anthony Blinken or Hillary Clinton or someone of that ilk who's just simply prepared to do what the multinational corporations deem most profitable for them and what the people who are in power in this country want. And people in power means billionaire class.
I agree with all that. I still am suspicious about the whole Blinken Mossad connection.
Well, is there one? I mean, is there something I'm not aware of? Because I didn't know he had...
his wife, you got to look at it. It looks like, I'm going to say it wrong, but like his wife is connected to a Mossad guy somehow. And it's got to do with Epstein. I'm sorry. I really should have been prepared if I was going to make a comment
don't
like
worry.
that.
I'll
the family tree. It's a family tree thing.
Yeah, no, I'll look that up. I don't know. I wasn't aware of that. I mean, I sort of, I don't look so closely at stories like that. I probably should do more of that. I tend to just take people at face value. I said that before, and maybe I should need to look beyond the surface, underneath the surface sometimes.
Yeah. And then the only other thing I'm going to say is that I've been watching, I don't really watch any of the networks anymore, so I get my piecemeal news, but it's so scary what's going on with Russia right now, the brinksmanship with Russia. And it all could have been avoided, as we know. We would never have allowed, and we did not allow in the 1960s, Cuba to host Russian missiles pointed at the United States that close to us. Why in the world do we expect Russia to allow NATO and NATO forces on their border? This could have been avoided, and it's such a brink right now, and it's terrifying.
So I want to play a clip for you. I have this up, Stephanie. So before you go, you asked about Russia and why we're involved in Russia. And I wasn't necessarily going to play this today because I've got so many other things on the plate. But this was from these guys that do Dissidents. They're progressive podcasters like me, except they have a bigger audience. But everyone does. Just real quick, listen to this. Here they talk about why we're in Russia. Oh, let me get that video up.
Tusker, why are people always picking on Russia?
So you heard the question, why are people always picking on Russia? Why is our government, why is Rachel mad? I would devote every other episode, Stephanie, to telling us how evil Russia is. And now this woman, Tusker, who I have no idea who she is, I tried to find out, couldn't find out. She'll say, this is why we're so focused, why the military-industrial complex, the U.S. government, is so focused on fighting Russia.
Because, like I said, because Russia is a very large landmass filled with tons of natural resources, and they have sovereign control over their country. And we don't like it when a country has sovereign control over their resources, no matter where they are in the world, no matter whether they are liberal or communist or fascist. Now, the fascists will work with us because they'll help us get those resources from the people, but the others, not so. So that's always been the problem. They want to balkanize Russia. They want to split it up into tiny little pieces. They literally do want to install puppet governments. Like all the Zelenskys and all the people in Serbia and all those, not Serbia, they're not one, but like all of those people, to have those puppet governments to be able to put in their NGOs, to be able to run their PSYOP information campaigns, put their ruling class involved, and then they can dangle those countries by a string and suck up all the natural resources. They want to do that with Russia, they want to do it with China, and they want to do it wrong.
Touche.
All right, so there you have it. Any comment on that, Stephanie?
Yeah, that sounds very true. And I will say I have a friend who's originally from St. Petersburg, and she's been in the States since she was like in her 20s. But when this all started, she was telling me she lived in both Russia and Ukraine. I mean, she's Russian. And she was basically telling me those people in the Donbass region are ethnically Russian. They identify as Russian. They want to be a part of Russia, and I don't know, this was also unnecessary. And it does remind me, coming back to everything's about resources, and I'll call you with more receipts on this because I don't want to say dumb things and not have like the stuff to back it up. But there was a plan some long time ago, maybe you've covered this, there was some plan like decades ago to actually make a new canal through Gaza to replace, so that they would not have to go around the straits that are controlled by Yemen. That they wanted to make a canal through there, and then also the discovery of the natural gas off the coast of Gaza not long before all this started. Now, when I take those two facts in my brain, and then I think about the fact that I heard that the Israeli government had been warned that Hamas was planning something. They've been warned many times, and to the point where, and again, I'll have to call you with where I heard this, but that they told people just shut up or we'll put you in jail kind of thing. And then we're supposed to believe that these Hamas terrorists like kind of zoomed in on motorized hang gliders and had all that time to do all that damage and all that destruction without the Middle East's strongest military getting to them before they did that, or, the world's arguably best intelligence service intercepting that. That is like really hard to believe. So when you do connect the dots on these facts, and the fact that Blinken was like over there within a week talking about exploiting the natural resources, the natural gas off the coast of Gaza to quote unquote rebuild Gaza, to get the funds to quote unquote rebuild Gaza when all this is over. It's just very suspicious.
Well, Jared Kushner was talking about all that beachfront property in Gaza on the Mediterranean Sea, how nice it would be to develop it, I guess, put a few Trump resorts there. With respect to your specific question about a canal through Gaza, I was not aware of that. I have read about, I don't think I ever did a program about it, a pipeline through Gaza that would allow
the natural gas.
So that they wouldn't have to ship it all through the Red Sea and the Strait. I think it's at the Straits of Hormuz, or that's different.
Yeah,
the Houthi area is not one that the ships want to go through. So my understanding was the pipeline would be a good end run around it. But I wasn't aware. But there might well be a canal planned as well.
I'll send you the stuff on this. I'm sorry. I should have had all my little things written down, and I'll send you all of the.
I just want to make one other point before you go and before I go too, because we're talking about why we're in Russia, why we've demonized Russia. We heard from that woman saying, Tusker saying, and I wish I knew who she was because she seems so knowledgeable and so smart about it. I wanted to do some more research on her, but saying, hey, this is all about Russian natural resources. And she's not the first one to say that, by the way, but certainly that was a very persuasive analysis. It also explains, and I showed this up on the screen. You probably can't see it, Stephanie. Maybe you can, of the column there by Stephen Wertheim, guest in the New York Times, why or America isn't leading the world. And he calls out Biden for many failings, including failing to try to broker some kind of a peace agreement. As you pointed out correctly, we wouldn't allow Russian missiles, close to our border. We didn't. It's perfectly legit, reasonable for Putin to say no to our weapons to NATO there. And yet, despite the fact that it's reasonable, we have fought, we have not even tried to negotiate really a settlement of the Ukraine conflict, thereby relegating Ukrainians to more death, more suffering, more destruction of their cities. It seems kind of clear this is because we don't want peace. Is that right? Do we just not want peace?
I don't think we do, no. I mean, this is kind of John Mearsheimer's court, the sort of international realism stuff. But yeah, no, I don't think we do want peace. And I guess a topic for another time, but the big question on my mind is for those of us who kind of can't stomach the blue party anymore. There's a lot of global left things happening, but we're not unified. So I just keep thinking when and how, as a global left, can we somehow come together to organize our pressure and forces? Because no, I don't think any of these parties really want peace,
Well, from your lips to somebody, whoever's ears, the great spaghetti monster's ears, we need to come together, and it just seems so tough. The left is so fragmented too. There's so much. I get into it with folks because I'm not a big believer in DEI and all that, and I feel like it divides our movement. But to be fair to those who support it, when I criticize it, they'll say to me, "You're dividing our movement." So I don't know how we build a unified coalition of, I think, poor, struggling, working class people and those who want a better life for them. I don't know how we do it, Stephanie.
Yeah. All right, I'll sleep on it. Thanks, Hal.
You do that. I hope you get some. I hope you find something out in your dreams, because it's so far I've got nowhere. Thanks so much, Stephanie, checking in. That's going to do it. I so appreciate that call from Stephanie, making my life a lot easier and bringing some real valuable insights into the program, especially with respect to Gaza and why we may be so supportive of the Israeli genocidal atrocities there. I did just put that clip up from the New York Times by Wertheim. Why is Joe Biden making such few, if any, visible efforts to seek peace through democracy? Is it diplomacy? Is it because of the resources? It sure seems like it. It sure seems like a plausible, I would say even compelling explanation. I'll be back tomorrow. It's the free for all. Hope we get more calls. Love the calls. We'd love to get some new callers as well. Have had some in recent days.